On today's show, the Capitals are on top of the world and playing really well right now, but how would this team fare if they faced a substantial injury? And are the Capitals and Jakob Chychrun close to a new deal?
Your Locked On Capitals, your daily podcast on the Washington Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Well, hello and welcome into this edition of Locked On Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Dan Holme. I've covered the Capitals for the last 3 seasons for Locked On and various other outlets before that. I'm also the host of the weekly show called The Capitals Minutecast, available wherever you find your podcasts. Today's episode is brought to you by our friends at Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. So in this edition of Locked On Capitals, we talk about roster depth for the Capitals. Listen, they're on top of the world right now. They're sitting on top of the Metro thinking we are bulletproof. We are untouchable. But how would this team fare if they faced substantial injury? How would this team fare if they were minus Protas, if they were minus PLD, or both of them at the same time? How would this team fare if they were minus Sandin and Carlson, or both at the same time? And are the players that are healthy scratches on the roster right now ready for bigger things? I'll talk about that later. I'll talk about Andrew Mangiapane had his best game as a Capital, humming along that fourth line. The bottom six was huge. Andrew Mangiapane was huge in that success. I'll talk about that. And then in the final segment, I'll talk about, is Jakob Chychrun close to a new deal with the Caps? But just to get it going here, talking about roster depth, and I think it's easy to live in kind of a bubble that everything is going well for the Capitals right now. You take a look at the standings, there's on top of the Metro division. At times they've been the best in the NHL or tied for the best in the NHL or the best in the Eastern Conference. So I think that to a certain extent, there's a false sense of security that this team is infallible, that it can do no wrong. But like I talked about off the intro there, how would this team fare if they faced substantial injury to some of their key players? And I know what some of you are going to say, hey, Dan, the Capitals did all right minus their captain. This team is built kind of around Alex Ovechkin now, that they play really well when he's here, but they can also thrive when he's not here. But what would happen if, like Pierre-Luc Dubois, who's been so huge for this team, and Alexei Protas and Tom Wilson, what if one of those players or two of those players got injured? How well would a Jakub Vrana, how well would he play if you inserted him into the lineup? How would Alexyev or Dylan McIlrath, how would they play? So that is what we are going to dive into in this first segment. It's become clear that, Spencer Carbery is trying to navigate what I'm going to call a delicate situation. The Capitals this season have generally managed to stay healthy. So it's something that they really haven't had to entertain. We've seen Jakob Chychrun miss, was it a couple games? Alex Ovechkin was out for a bit. Charlie Lindgren was out there for a bit. But all things considered, the Capitals found a way to weather the storm. Now, the consistency has made things tough, for Dylan McIlrath, Alex Alexyev, and Jakub Vrana as they are watching those games from up in the press box. And if you're not familiar, they do get activity in pregame skates, scrimmages, practices, those kind of things, but nothing can fully replace real game situations. And I think that it would be a good thing to get them game time, but ultimately not to the detriment of the overall picture of the Capitals winning games. I don't want to put Dylan McIlrath in there and have him make some sort of blunder that led to a game-winning goal just to get him some work in. That's just not the way I want to see things. And, a detractor would say the same thing could happen for another player. And I get all that, but you want more of a sure thing. And I think that we have seen this team constructed as is, and those guys have earned their stripes, that we know what those guys are capable of. But Spencer Carbery has some insight on it, saying, quote, "We'd love to get them in and play some games, but unfortunately, that's the way it played out," unquote. And this is what they say, show business, not show happy. That ultimately, of course, it would be a nice thing to get McIlrath, Alexyev, Vrana in there. But at the end of the day, it's about the business of winning games. Period. Now, he understands that frustration that comes along with watching the game from the press box when it especially lingers on to multiple games. And at the end of the day, Jakub Vrana, I hate to say, should be pretty happy that he's even on an active roster for an NHL team, collecting some of that NHL money. Same thing goes for McIlrath, who is definitely a player that took the long way home in his NHL career, spent some time in the NHL, AHL, and now back in the NHL, that I think he understands the lay of the land. And Alex Alexyev is the biggest question mark, as we have not seen him in a substantial amount of time. Now, upcoming opportunities, as we know, there's a 12-day break for the Four Nations face-off, and Carbery is looking at potential ways to work these players in. But I don't really think that it's going to be possible unless there's some sort of injury. Do you want to pull Ethan Frank out to put Jakub Vrana in? I don't. Do you want to take out, one of the Capitals blue liners to put in McIlrath or Alexyev? Not really. I want to go with the sure thing. Now, that said, he believes in the current lineup and doesn't see a pressing need. We're on the same page there. And a prime example of this is John Carlson. The Capitals went out and got Chychrun and Matt Roy and these players to ostensibly take some of that pressure off John Carlson so he doesn't have to play 25 or 30 minutes a night. Well, guess what he's doing? He is still leading the team with the most ice time, but that's because he's playing quality minutes. I would rather see 25 to 30 minutes of John Carlson than a lackluster performance from a Dylan McIlrath or an Alex Alexyev. Not saying it would be a lackluster performance, but I think you get what I'm talking about here. Carbery hasn't felt the need to rest him yet, which shows just how well the team is performing. Now, drawing from past experience, if the past is any indicator, if you take a look at last spring, the Capitals faced a substantial amount of injuries, and a player like Dylan McIlrath, well, that is kind of what put him on the radar of the Capitals. Like, we see how well he played in Hershey. We've seen how well he's played in his past, but all things considered, was a key piece, even though the Capitals got eliminated in short order, played admirably in the role that he had to fill. He reminded the team, talking about the most hopeful thing I can tell you is, you remember last year, game 1 in Madison Square Garden, Dylan McIlrath was playing in that hockey game, quote unquote, by head coach Spencer Carbery. So these guys need to be ready. I get that. And I don't have their contracts in front of me, so I'm talking waiver status and all this and that and the other thing. But if it is possible, if they could cycle these players through Hershey just to kind of get their juices going again, then I would be all about that. And I understand the perils of having these guys kind of in the deep freeze. There's not a lot of Irwins like we used to have on the team, where you could put him in the cryogenic deep freeze and take him out, and he came out like a robot, like, I am going to play hockey. There's not a lot of guys like that out there. So I think it's important to get these guys some opportunities if and when it happens. Now, the thing that really draws all of this into focus is the Capitals are sitting pretty with a 9-point lead over the second place Hurricanes. We don't want to jeopardize that. We do not want to jeopardize that to put in a guy just to get some work in. The challenge now is balancing rest for the veterans while keeping fresh legs engaged and ready for the veterans and the guys that are sitting on the bench. How do we get them more reps? It's a tight walk. It's a tight rope to walk. And at the end of the day, I'm not too worried about it. I'm sorry. I hate to say that, McIlrath, Alexyev, and Vrana, but I want the sure thing out on the ice, the very best chance at winning games, period. We don't want to squander the last year and change just to get, a scratch some time into a game. We want the best guy out on the ice. So Alex Ovechkin can do, chase down Gretzky, number 1, and number 2, hopefully win another Stanley Cup. And I know it's kind of a dream that's up there. I'm really setting the bar extremely high. But, I mean, all things considered, this whole team this year has impressed everyone, myself included, that I would not rule anything out. That includes a Stanley Cup. So getting back to it, that is ultimately why I want the best guys out on the ice every single night. All right, so coming up here after the break, we'll talk about the breakout game by Andrew Mangiapane. Listen, we remember what he did a few years ago with the Calgary Flames, and this season has done a good job. But up until this point, hasn't really done a great job. Well, that all changed against the Panthers. Andrew Mangiapane and the fourth line were huge. I'll break it all down straight ahead. Looking for tickets to your next big event, whether it's a concert, a comedy show, or a sports game, finding the right ticket at the right price can be a headache. But with Game Time Picks, it's never been easier. Let me tell you how it works. With Game Time Picks, the app does all the hard work for you. It curates the best deals so you don't have to waste time searching through endless ticket listings, and that is frustrating. The good news is your favorite band is playing your favorite sports team. Now the headache. There's a billion apps out there that are selling tickets, and what is the view of the stage? Where the playing surface going to be? Take all of that confusion away from the situation with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDON NHL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest prices, guaranteed. All right, welcome back into this edition of Locked On Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. You can find me over on Twitter. It's at DanCaps218. You can find the show on Twitter. It's at Locked On Caps. And I want to thank all of you for making this your first listen of the day. All right, in this next segment here, we are going to talk about Andrew Mangiapane, who, all things considered, I think has been a good addition to this team. We know that he is going to test the open market this summer, and there is the distinct possibility that this is the last season, the only season that he plays for the Capitals, as they have guys like Ryan Leonard sitting in the wings. Now, you know, if the Capitals could come to terms and sign him to an affordable deal, that would be great. But what we've seen this year has been good. But what we saw here in the last game against the Panthers, well, that definitely elevated his game, and ultimately why head coach Spencer Carbery said it was his best game as a Capital. So let's dive into the great performance by Andrew Mangiapane. And the fourth line in general, Nick Dowd included, an impressive 6-3 victory over the reigning Stanley Cup winning Florida Panthers. The game was a standout performance at home, and one of the key stories was the offensive duo of Andrew Mangiapane and Nick Dowd. If we want to take a look at the box score, Nick Dowd, a goal, 2 assists, good for 3 points. Andrew Mangiapane, a goal, assist, 2 points. That is what we're talking about, generating opportunities. And that fourth line is one to be reckoned with. Not typically the case when you hear a fourth line, but has been nothing but killer for the Capitals. And talking about Mangiapane's journey, if you're not familiar, he signed an entry-level contract with the Flames back in 2016 and spent a couple seasons, with Stockton in the AHL. And then you fast forward to the 21-22 season, kind of the high water mark of his career, if you will. He truly broke out with 35 goals and 55 points. That is ultimately what the Capitals were hoping for, I think, when they signed him, was that they could get a little bit of that 21-22 Mangiapane. But if you take a look at it, even in the 23-24 season, he was productive, collecting 40 points before being traded to the Caps. So a good move for the Capitals. As the Capitals were looking to plug holes around the roster, I think that Andrew Mangiapane has been a good addition. I'm not going to say a great addition. He has been a good addition. And Spencer Carbery was pleased with his performance. He couldn't have been more complimentary of Mangiapane, describing it as potentially, quote, his best game as a Capital, unquote. Carbery highlighted Mangiapane's speed and presence on the ice, particularly in conjunction with what he did on the ice, the goal, the assists. He was huge. And what are some of the things that we know about Mangiapane? He never goes for the easy goal. He always tries to sneak it in between the bar and the netminder, like his shoulder. There's a spot about like this big, and he squeaks his way through there, wrap around the back of the net, and there's just this really small opening, and he just drives it home. Those are the things that I really like about Andrew Mangiapane. He is an overachiever. He's not going for an easy goal. So there is a lot to love about his game. Now, just watching the game in particular, there was a lot of things that really showed some promise. That fourth line, which I spoke of, Nick Dowd driving for the net and crashing into Bobrovsky. Nick Dowd said sometimes those things happen, but exciting and good to see that bottom six in general playing a big role for this team. So that is ultimately what we like. And, you take a look at it, teamwork and communication. After the game, Mangiapane emphasized the importance of teamwork and communication with his line mates, Dowd and Brandon Duhaime. That's quite a line, all things considered. And you take a look at that fourth line, it's been mixed and matched. The one constant is Nick Dowd stirring the drink at the center position on the fourth line. And huge. Hit me up on Twitter at DanCaps218 or at Locked On Caps. Let me know your thoughts. Do you like that configuration of the fourth line, or do you like some of the things that we've seen before? But since the beginning of 2025, they've been really focusing on defensive responsibilities. The fourth line, that is, alongside with their offensive efforts, definitely a refreshing shift in strategy, kind of a shutdown line that will shut down some of the greatest lines in the NHL. But all things considered, it didn't go unnoticed. It wasn't just Spencer Carbery. Logan Thompson applauded him as well. Thompson praised Mangiapane's energy and impact throughout the game. So a tip of the hat goes out to Andrew Mangiapane. Definitely was put on the radar of Spencer Carbery. Like, wow, this is a really good effort. Maybe that fourth line will continue to see that same configuration with Nick Dowd and Brandon Duhaime. I liked what I saw. I didn't mention Brandon Duhaime there too much, but he was key out there as well. A good teammate, a guy that brings the energy. So a big game for the fourth line, but more specifically for Andrew Mangiapane. Hopefully that is something that he can build on. All right, so coming up here after the break, we'll talk about the very latest with Jakob Chychrun. Is he any closer to a new deal with the Capitals? Listen, I'm drinking the Chychrun Kool-Aid. I don't need to see anymore. But what are Chris Patrick's thoughts? And what about his agent? I'll discuss straight ahead. All right, welcome back into this edition of Locked On Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. The best way that you can help grow the show is to subscribe to Locked On Capitals on YouTube and comment anything down below. All right, in this next segment here, we're talking to Jakob Chychrun. And I've spoke about him here quite a bit often as the Capitals were kind of waiting to see about what the salary cap would look like in the coming years. And good news, it is going to increase over the next 3 seasons, lending itself to being a pretty good possibility that the Capitals can come to terms with a new deal with Jakob Chychrun. Now, I love his game. I like what I saw. But, to be fair here, what is it going to mean? You're going to look at about a 6 or 7 year deal with a boatload of money. And later in the segment, I'll break that all down. But, there's a little bit of caution there, but that is kind of just the way the NHL goes. It's part and parcel of professional sports that players want to get paid, but they also want a lot of term. Tom Wilson, a lot of term. Logan Thompson, a lot of term. And potentially Jakob Chychrun. There's going to be a lot of players on the hook, or those 3 players in particular on the hook, not to mention Pierre-Luc Dubois, that are going to be on the hook for quite some time with the Capitals. But at the end of the day, I think it's worth it. Since joining the team, he has made quite an impression. He has his first 47 games with the Caps. He has posted 33 points, scoring 13 goals and 20 assists. Now, his performance has sparked plenty of talk about a potential contract extension. Of course, if you are an everydayer of the show, I talk about that. And As Chychrun approaches unrestricted free agency, he's likely, like I said, due for a big raise. His current salary of 4.6, yeah, that's probably not going to get it done anymore. And he's made it clear that he likes playing with the Capitals. Both Chris Patrick, Brian McClellan, and the Capitals organization said that they want to test the waters to see how well they like him and how well Jakob likes playing with the Caps. So far, so good. Chychrun said, quote, "My agent has, as far as reaching out to the Caps. I don't know how much I want to go into detail on that, but there hasn't been a whole lot. We just started," unquote. That quote is from Russian Machine Never Breaks. Now, his agent, Andy Scott, who is known for getting big deals like Leon Draisaitl's $112 million deal, is definitely going to squeeze as much money out of the Capitals as humanly as possible. Who are some of his other clients? Maybe you've heard of Mikko Rantanen, Leon Draisaitl, and Patrick Laine. With that kind of expertise, you can bet Chychrun is going to look for a big deal. Now, according to Sportsnet's Elliot Friedman, like I said off the top of the segment, the Capitals were waiting for clarity for salary cap projections before any moves. But now we know, roughly how much money the Capitals will have to spend. The NHL and NHLPA have recently confirmed that the salary could see a significant increase of $7.5 million next season, reaching $95.5 million, with more growth expected in coming years. This opens up a whole lot for Chychrun's future contracts, also with Charlie Lindgren and, Andrew Mangiapane, these kind of players, Nick Dowd, that could potentially get new deals soon. So what stands about Chychrun's enthusiasm for being a Capital? Even in his interview last summer, he sounds like he was happy, but he wanted to see how well of a fit he was here. He recently said, quote, "We love it here. The group of guys is awesome. We're playing good hockey and it's been a lot of fun. I think it didn't take very long to settle in," unquote. So, winning makes people happy. The Capitals sitting on top of the Metro, great. If the Capitals were sitting in the bottom of the Metro, he probably wouldn't be singing that same tune. His effortless adaptation, to the team's fast-paced style under Spencer Carbery has elevated his status. Not just a defender, a guy that can find the back of the net, a win-win for a blue liner. Plus, we can't forget about his amusing pregame ritual of wearing a headband to keep his hair in check. So, I don't know what to make of that. I don't got any hair on the top of my head, so I am not going to criticize. If I had that kind of hair, still probably wouldn't do it, but in any event, I am not going to knock him for wanting to have some nice hair. Now, the Capitals currently have exclusive negotiating rights with Chychrun until June 30th, giving them a chance to offer him an 8-year extension. Wow. That's really pushing the chips all in on a player that I think deserves it. And it's not often that, like I say, that I would even entertain an idea like that. And I understand I'm just a podcast host. I am not the general manager of the team, but I think he's deserving of it. I know that to start the season, I was a bit on the fence, saying that I didn't want to be too thirsty as far as Jakob Chychrun is concerned. What kind of player are we going to have first? Let's not get crazy. Let's not put the ring on the finger and say, "I love you" on the first date. And the Capitals did do that. They took Jakob Chychrun out on a few dates, and I think they're ready to put a ring on it. Ultimately, I think that it is the right thing to do, and I think the happy couple of the Capitals and Jakob Chychrun will walk happy into the sunset. So as I wrap up this segment in the show here, there is a lot to be happy about. The Capitals sitting in a good position coming off a big win over the reigning Stanley Cup champion Florida Panthers. Good thing about the Capitals, as they have not lost more than 2 games in a row all season, a testament of the pushback, the tenacity of this team, that they can weather a storm, that they're not going to spin out of control just because they lose a game. That's the old Capitals. That's the Capitals of last season, that they lost a game, or they were behind in a game that would send them into a tailspin. This team is truly built different. And it's the additions. It's Spencer Carbery systems fully integrated, but not to forget about the players themselves, the players that have stepped up, the new additions, the younger players that have taken their game to the next level. I'm talking Connor McMichael, these kind of players, Ethan Frank, huge for the Capitals, not to mention the huge additions of Pierre-Luc Dubois, Jakob Chychrun, Duhaime Radish, these kind of guys. That's what is putting the Capitals in a really great position, and I'm very excited to see what lies ahead for this year's Capitals team. All right, once again, I want to thank you for joining me on this edition of Locked On Capitals, your only daily year-round podcast covering the Washington Capitals, and I want to thank all of you that listen on the audio side and watch this on YouTube. You are what makes this show successful. All right, once again, I want to thank you for joining me on this edition of Locked On Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Dan Holme, and I'll talk to you again next time.